different. So this is what I am going to do is we're talking about managing the stress of self-isolation and all of the, and being greener. Sorry, all of a sudden different buttons aren't working. All right, so let's get started. So Corona happened, right? And lots of things as a result have been the domino effect from it. But let's start first with just sort of what we think of. Well, what do you see in this picture? I got this off of, I'm in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Inquirer. This was just from a week ago. And this is one of the pictures coming in from, I believe it was, hang on, now I have to put on my glasses and look even more, having great gravitas now. This was from the Ukraine. So if anybody's really bold, they can unmute their mic and tell me what they see in this picture, if anything. If not, I'll recap what others have told me when they look at this picture.
You can also type in the message bar if you prefer.
Yeah, that's a good way of.
The giant mask on the bus.
Yep. That's sort of the first thing that everybody takes a look at. So the bus has a nice big mask. They clearly did not run out of bus masks yet. Anything else that people notice in the picture?
In the message bar, we got that the dog seems unconcerned.
Absolutely. So the dog is doing the best job of social isolation in the picture and social distancing. Somebody mentioned this morning that they noticed that there is the truck right up against the bus there. So we see them practically kissing. Oh, this is not letting me use my mouse to point. Other people have noticed the man and the boy walking along, also at a little bit of a distance. Somebody this morning said, well, it looks kind of like gray and a little bit overcast. It looks empty. Other people had more of the emotional overtones of this looks like COVID, whereas before it might be bustling. The buses have stopped running. It's parked. It's not only parked, but it can't get out. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. So, people see a lot when they start looking at pictures. So just keep that in mind as we go along and look at different things. Oh, no, I've got my mouse working. So here they are, being very nose to nose. All right, so this is what we're talking about this afternoon. What does it mean to be an environmentalist during COVID-19 epidemic? How do you build resilience and hope in the face of so many mounting crises? What does the resilience even mean? And we'll talk about how to manage the stress of self-isolation, ways to embrace a sustainable self, and we're going to use that very deliberately, how to navigate the guilt associated with letting go of certain green practices in the face of global health, all while building hope for the future and work ahead. You should know a little bit about me. I am a clinical health psychologist. I work at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, and my background is very much working with people in resilience and managing stress. Although this is a new twist, I definitely did not have anything long ago in graduate school that talked about pandemics, although perhaps that will be added to the curriculum going forward. I work in both a hospital and outpatient OBGYN practice. The people I was talking to this morning were my residents who are frontline in dealing with the COVID. And it was interesting how much this translated even into their world. So I said, look, guys, I didn't do separate slides for you, but let me share with you what I'm going to be talking to folks about this afternoon. And I would encourage you to think also, it's not just green practices, but other things that are going on in your life, because this is a confluence of a lot of issues and factors that are going on in our lives, and they don't separate out. And that's part of what we have to think about when we talk about managing all the stresses that are coming our way, because these are ongoing and chronic. So let's go. So now we've got the background. And, I had to laugh because when Molly asked me to do this talk, I was like, okay, open up the paper, the next day, and sure enough, in the Philadelphia paper, here we have spring comes too soon, and it's not a welcome appearance. So the world isn't stopping just because we're going through COVID. The work that you are all doing and hoping to do more of is still waiting out there. Although I think all of us are a little happy to see some of the blooms on the tree, even if it's a little too soon. It's a welcome distraction when I go for a walk to see what is blooming and um, all the buds budding. It gives me a little bit of that hopefulness lift too. But I'm one of those people who still lose their mind every spring going, oh my goodness, look, all the buds are coming up. And I did see my first crocus, so I'm happy. I live in the suburbs, so we see those things. Um, so look, this is the best graphic I can think of when we talk about COVID-19. I actually have this up in my office. I've used it for other things, but I thought, nope, this is COVID-19. This is what I had planned. This is what we had all planned. We're just going on our lives and it's going up and up. And with all the work that we had thought of and all of that, all of a sudden it's out the window. And what actually happened is a very convoluted roller coaster ride of what's going on. So this is this is just a bit of a journey, isn't it? It's not the straight line that we saw before, but that's life right now. In fact, that was probably about 8 a.m. this morning. This was probably about noon. And I suspect when we have debrief, we might be down here at the end of the day, but we'll see. So it's not a straightforward journey. And there's a lot of things that we feel similarly, and yet very differently, don't we? I've always liked this little cartoon because, here's this very nice cisgendered white male who says to the African-American pregnant woman, I know how you feel. Not so much. So even in a COVID crisis, in terms of how we're reacting to how our lives, our personal lives, as well as our work, as well as all of our interests, how they get disrupted, is we can share a lot, and yet we still have our own unique reactions to all of this. So that is, something to keep in mind when we talk about what the stress of self-isolation is, because it's different for different people. Two of my patients yesterday that I saw via telehealth, both interestingly back to back had 3-year-old sons. Their stress of self-isolation was very different than mine. I do not have 3-year-olds anymore. But for them, as evidenced by in the middle of the session, this was a first for me after over 30 years of doing this, we heard a loud voice from the next room saying very loudly, Mommy, I pooped. So that disrupted our session for about 5 minutes because that needed to be attended to. But for those folks, the stress of self-isolation is more dealing with having a toddler at home and not having a lot of adult interaction. For others, it's more the uncertainty, and so many on Broadway, since Broadway is dark, have no idea when things are going to open again. The financial implications here in Philadelphia, 2 of our large museums laid off respectively about 60 and 90% of their staff today. I mean, there's a lot going on, not only in our own worlds, but in worlds of those around us. So the self-isolation is, am I even getting information? How do I connect with friends and family? I mean, what are all the components? And so, I invite you to do the exercise. Think about all the different components in your life that even since you've been self-isolating, of what are the things that are hardest for you and what are the things that are less hard for you. For some people, somebody told me the other day that one of the hardest things for them is that their calendar is just, they live their life by the calendar, and now the calendar doesn't exist for them anymore. Just even knowing that you were coming on and listening to a webinar today at 1 o'clock, for a lot of people, says that grounds my day. For others, the having lack of structure is not a hard thing. I've always kidded my husband saying when we go on vacation, if he tells me, ask the question, what are we doing today? And sort of what's the schedule for the day? I will become mildly homicidal, because to me, who lives only by a schedule, vacation is lovely to let go, except when I am staying at home and I can't go out. All of a sudden I miss the thing that was very familiar to me. So we break stress down into its components. The other thing to think about is what sets us up for stress. Well, one of the things that in our lives, and we know this from the psychology literature, is that we do very well with predictability. We all like a modicum of control, some of us more than others. Some of us have a little more sphincter control than others when it comes to control. And social support. So what does COVID do? Well, sort of predictability, zero, right? Control, oh, right, yeah, no, we don't have any of that. I don't control my personal life. I don't control my professional life. I don't control what's going on around me. I can't control what resources are coming in. Being in New York City, which I assume most of you are, I mean, you guys are in the bullseye of being feeling that there is zero predictability and no control. And the social support we can have, and it'll be very interesting, and I'm sure colleagues of mine will be writing about this for decades to come, about what it means to have social support via um, these platforms like Zoom or any of the other ones, FaceTime, but that is still very fundamentally different from our routine. Think about what you used to do. For me, I would get up in the morning. I know when I would drive into the hospital garage, the very first thing is the guy who is the parking attendant. For some reason, we've gotten to know each other, so I always wave to him first thing in the morning. My first human contact out of the house is suddenly gone. From there, most of us might have a coffee place we stop in. There are certain things, if you're taking public transportation, there are often familiar faces just over time. There's a lot of things, all the little touch points that are so important to us, and even the niceties. I'm one of those people who still holds doors for other people. I like that interaction when somebody says, thank you, or is holding it for me, or just even walking dogs and passing each other, have a nice day. That we still have. It seems that dogs have been a very helpful part of COVID coping, because it allows for social interaction, although dogs are notoriously bad at social distancing, not a concept they've gotten down. And I have a 90-pound dog, so he can pull me closer than I sometimes would like. But all of these three cogs that we're seeing on the screen are part of what helps us, keeps all of our gears running. And if we even take one out, already things are running differently, but now all three are compromised. So it leaves us sort of with what we currently have is kind of a blank screen. And I will say, if this, depending on how long this goes on, I suspect we will all figure out some of the things that go in here. Already, I don't know if any of you have been participating like in game nights, and people are doing it in Google Hangouts and doing all sorts of things. But all of a sudden, something that was not on front and center on our radar is now, people are getting clever and figuring out how to do it. On the mental health professional listserv that I'm on for one of my professional groups, they've already set up a wine and wine night once a week. That's WINE and WHINE. In case you ever wondered if your therapist ever whine, the answer is, oh, absolutely. So, but why? Because in my profession, one of the stresses is I can spend 6 hours a day listening to everybody else's anxiety, and now I've got to do something with that. And how do I take self-care? For all of you who are part of this bigger community, and that community is taken away, we got to figure out something to put in here to make things work. And look, perspective's different. They absolutely can differ. It depends on where you are. I'm sure, do any of you have friends who are, this is the end of the world. This is definitely it. Life as we know it has ceased to exist. It will never go back to normal. This is end of days and all of that. And other people are like, you really shouldn't be, you're supposed to be self-quarantining and you're not invincible. Everybody's different. I have people who are taking their Amazon boxes and aside from feeling guilty that all the shipping materials are taking that and putting it in a separate room and leaving it there for days before they'll even go in and take things out of boxes, and other people who have no concerns at all and are bringing them straight in and hopefully not embracing the UPS driver along the way. You know, if you're one of the people who lost their job and have zero income coming in, your perspective of how scary and how long this is running can be very different. So you're standing up here in just a little bit of water, but if you've lost your job, you're living paycheck to paycheck and not knowing, what's going to happen next, it's going to feel real deep. And I think it's what really is important for all of us is to understand, sort of take a moment, take a pause and figure out where the heck are we standing in this, including things like, what does this mean for the future? So here's the person who's our proverbial half full person, glass half full, who's saying, you know what, the environment, we'll get back to it. It's okay. These things happen. In fact, maybe this will even get people more aware that crises can happen and it's a global phenomenon, versus the other person who's just up to their neck with all this, has no bandwidth left to worry about anything, and looks at the future and the environment and says, it's so deep, I can't, I'm just keeping my nose and lips here above water. And that's, that's about as good as I can do. And that's also understanding in terms of how we're going to handle this. If you don't have a finger on your own emotional pulse, it's kind of hard to know how to take care of yourself. So let's move on. The other thing is just even how words affect us. Before we could talk about the climate crisis, and climate got full billing with the word crisis. It owned it. That was, crisis was the climate's own special space. But now, shove over climate crisis. Now we've got climate crisis, and it's alliterative. So it gets like, come on, that's even better to have an alliterative crisis. And how we use words are going to affect us. So even with the climate or the coronavirus, be aware even of how language is being used and how it's going to impact on you. We know from research that words have powerful consequences. They can change directions of conversation. They certainly are emotionally provocative. They modify our sense of trust and security, and they have incredible implied meanings. Now, I always feel silly doing saying this to an audience like yours, because you guys know that, it is the beauty of words, as well as everything from body language to everything else that goes on to make the theater world. But we also know those resonate in different ways, depending on the cultural response, the education level, past experiences, or just even individual experiences, how we hear words. In the medical field, a crisis is not always the same thing as if you use the word climate crisis. A crisis might be something that's imminent, but not disastrous in the medical world. So depending on what world you live in, it definitely can resonate differently. However, now in the age of 24/7 media, and I'm sure everybody's gotten the message, stop watching it all the time because it gets us all jacked up, is that even the words that they pick, and I invite you to do the same exercise I do. When I see the headlines that they flash, or even the words scrolling by on the screen, pay attention to what words they pick, because they can be incredibly powerfully evocative. Now, I'll give you an example of this because I work in medicine. This is from a medical study, and they wanted to ask people how confident you are in a treatment, whether it's posed in a positive or a negative way with frequencies. So if I said to you, hey, we've got this pill and it works 95% of the time for what you have, are you more likely to be confident if I tell it to you that way, or I say, hey, I've got this great pill, it only fails 5% of the time? So anybody just think about which one works better for you? Which one is going to make you more confident to take that pill? Because that's what we love to do. We like to do pills. And the answer is we like positive language better. So I'm going to sell you better on something if I say this pill succeeds 95% of the time versus it fails 5% of the time. So we will use this. If I want to get you to go and do something, I might actually use the failure language. Okay, if you guys don't exercise every day, your heart failure rate will be 5% versus, what, if you go and work every day at work, if you exercise every day, you're going to have a 95 success rate. That might not, it might not incite you to action. So
Panelists, we have a strong 95% agreement in the chat as well. Everyone agrees. 95%.
Everybody wants the pill that works 95.
Yep.
Excellent. I don't have it, but okay. Although I will tell you, I have had reports from many of my patients that when they went to fill their Xanax prescription, they were out at the pharmacy. Does that also tell you something? Although I did respect my friend who told me that she is taking her Xanax in the morning and her cocktails at night, and it's working beautifully for her. So whatever gets you through it, zero judgment. That's a different type of self-care. We need to really be present, and we have to listen and engage. And I'm sure we've all had this experience. I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. Can you repeat everything you've said to me since you started working here? Ever work with that person? Yeah. But I think that's true even in dealing with the world we're living in now, which is we are fully engaged. I think everybody has a case of waxing and waning COVID virus. Anybody else like, oh, is that a scratch in my throat? Wait, I coughed. My dog sheds clouds of fur. If I weren't to cough, oh, right, and I live in the suburbs and everything's blooming, remember? So scratchy throat, eyes, red eyes, everything. Everybody is hyper vigilant. And furthermore, what I will tell you is that this in a slightly nefarious way, if once I can make anybody think that they've got something, all I have to do is help you concentrate on it. So can I talk everybody into a heart attack? Probably. What I do is I start with, okay, let's pay attention to your two arms. Is your left arm, let's pay attention to that left arm. Does that feel even slightly different from your right arm? And all of a sudden, yes, of course, it's going to start to feel differently because you know what you're doing? You're only paying attention to your left arm and the right arm is being completely ignored. And then it's like, well, is your breathing change? Well, now all of a sudden I'm paying attention to my breathing. Who pays attention to their breathing except for those of you who do breathing exercises in your professional life? But for the rest of us, we don't pay attention to our breathing, but all of a sudden I'm breathing. Is that the way I'm supposed to breathe? Am I breathing too fast? Am I breathing too little? If I get anxious, guess what? I breathe faster. So, all of this is going on. Being present, listening, and engaging is trying to push away all of that intervening noise that we all have. I mean, as a psychologist, this is 100% employment for me because we all have garbage that goes through our heads. That's the way it works. We all tell ourselves all sorts of things that are not helpful. And listening and engaging is sometimes just saying, oh, I am so thinking about, is my breathing changing? And does that mean I have COVID and I need to go get swabbed? That's, if we can distract and I come back and all of a sudden I'm not having problems breathing, or my throat that I thought was getting a little sore, or whatever it might be, that tells us that's really helpful. When we're listening and engaging to friends, and we want to share what some of our stresses are, we need them to be present and listening and engaging, and we need to do that for them. I'm sure everybody's had a friend or somebody they've worked with that all they're doing is waiting to have to see their lips stop moving so they can just jump in with their stuff, and they've heard nothing, like our cartoon friend here. So here's some of the things that we can start doing to change things. One is that our expectations of ourselves is one of mastery. We're supposed to master things, right? So things like, if I master my emotions, then I'm rewarded with a euthymic day. I particularly use the word euthymic to just give me even more credibility about being a psychologist. What's euthymic? It means that your emotions aren't going up and down all day. it's pretty much an even keeled day. But that's sort of what we think that it's set up as. Mastery of my emotions will give me this. We're taught that if we work harder, we can master a problem. And yet, in the era of COVID, it's not working. So what's mastering coronavirus? Well, if you Google this, which is a fun thing to do, what is all the stuff that people are doing to think that they are going to have mastery over what nobody else is able to control? So people are eating garlic. That always seems to be a favorite one, no matter what is going on. Works for vampires. Why wouldn't it work for coronavirus? Boiled ginger, which seems a waste of ginger to me when you can pickle it and have it with sushi. People are actually drinking Clorox. Hence, I was able to come up with a picture of somebody drinking alleged Clorox. People are drinking silver, and people are just plain old drinking, which is fine, but only up to a moment. You cannot master drinking. And so, if we're not going to use the mastery model, I'm just going to get better and better, and I'm going to master this. If that's not working, then what do? Well, we switch our model to one of effectiveness. Effectiveness and not mastery is the way to go forward. When we talk about a mastery model, most people shy away and avoid taking any action because if I have to master this, I'm just going to feel ineffective and overwhelmed. How do you cope with COVID? You can't cope with COVID as an entire entity, but you can say, I'm feeling lonely and disconnected. I'm going to call a friend. Or I'm feeling really down about the fact that the environment is going to hell in a handbasket because nobody's got any bandwidth for it, and I can do something to, even if it's a little thing like my in my own world of saying, but I still have control over my habits and I'm still recycling and doing whatever it is that makes you feel better. Let's thank you to the BGA and to Molly for inviting me, but I love their "you can't be green, but you can be greener" approach. And I've been talking to my patients about this a lot because the concept is saying, okay, you can't be 100%, what is it to be green? I don't even know what it means to be green. That is a mastery goal that will never be met, but I can still be a little bit greener. I mean, I went to full confession. I went to the market over about a week and a half ago, and I decided I was leaving my regular bags at home because I didn't want them full of COVID virus because I'd have to put them in the cart and all that. So I used all plastic bags. And of course, I had the 17-year-old lovely young woman checking me out and putting one thing in each bag. I was like, you're killing me here. You're absolutely killing me. To which I said, well, could you put a few things in a bag? And we did that, but it still was just one of those, there were tears in my eyes as I was doing it. But I thought I couldn't be any greener if I were on a ventilator. So I went with the plastic bags. We're asking ourselves, where can I be effective? And I will challenge you guys with all that. Where are the areas I can be effective, and don't go swinging for the fences? What are the little things that I can do that are going to be, needless to say, and do not everybody breathe okay, because I took all my plastic bags, and when they start collecting it, that will go in the recycling bin at the market where they collect them, but it still didn't feel very good. In terms of climate change versus coronavirus, I thought it was a very interesting, this was in the New York Times, I don't know if any of you guys saw it, but Elke Weber, a behavioral scientist at Princeton University, said that this makes climate science, which deals in the future of probabilities, hard to process and hard for us to be afraid of. And we know that about climate science. This isn't something that is new to us. But I thought what Dr. Weber said next was really interesting for this intersection of corona and climate. We are evolutionarily wired for taking care of the here and now. We're really bad at these decisions that require planning for the future. And think about it. Corona is not letting any of us plan for the future. There isn't one person that I talk to that says, great, now we know what we're doing. Being the associate program director for the residency at Jefferson, I've got my residents who are about to graduate and take jobs and go out into the world who are saying, well, can I even sit for my boards? They're not, I mean, all the testing stations are closed right now. Nobody's flying for oral boards. For some of my residents have graduated a couple of years ago. Our fourth year medical students are going, hey, I matched, I'm going to be an intern now, but can I even get there? In New York, I'm sure you all heard that NYU is graduating their medical students early and promoting them if they're willing to work at the hospital, in the ER, or internal medicine. I mean, everything's upside down. And so even when we talk about planning for the future for climate science, we already know it was hard because we're making decisions that require planning for the future. And now even in our regular lives, we're really kind of crap at planning for the future right now because of what's going on. So it's really nice. And come on, Dr. Weber's from Princeton, so they get extra credit for that. So what are our immediate concerns? Right now, if we're talking about climate science, it's about refocusing a nation and a world on another crisis. And people are going to be kind of had a little crisis burnout. We also know we need global cooperation to do anything in climate science. And it's not particularly encouraging to see how globally we're playing in the sandbox together, even with Corona. But the other thing is, and I want you to also take a look at your own level of burnout from crisis overload. As much as we are eager and want to be involved, we also can get burned out. And we're going to talk about this in a minute. But just, take your own pulse once in a while too. Understand also that for a lot of people that I'm talking to, this raises huge existential concerns. What's the meaning of all of this? What is the world going to be like? It gets absolutely overwhelming. And if you don't have an appreciation for where it gets overwhelming, you have no place to intervene with those feelings. You just sit there crushed under this sense of burnout and just the world being out of control. So we got to take a look at how we view the work to be done. Everybody, I would imagine, is familiar with our friend Sisyphus up here, who, yay for mythology, Sisyphus was doomed to his punishment for angering the gods, was to always have to roll this boulder up the hill, and when he got it up to the top, the boulder would roll back down, and he'd have to do that all again. One of my favorites. But so, sometimes that feels a little bit of what we're doing, but the reality is, here's my new favorite boulder picture. Everybody should have a favorite boulder picture, right? Why is this my favorite boulder picture? Because my old favorite boulder picture I couldn't access because we were having, I couldn't get into my computer at work. But then I decided I'd like this boulder picture even better, because if you look at it, we've got equipment behind here. You see the fire truck. What is the chance this fire truck can move that boulder? That would be about a 0, right? Can a person come up and push the boulder? No, even Sisyphus, his boulder is probably not quite that big. So we can't move a boulder, but we have tools to deal with the boulder. And you see my lovely pile of rocks over here. We are able to dynamite the heck out of that boulder and reduce it to a pile of rocks. And I might not be able to move every single rock on this. There's some pretty big ones, but there are also little ones this is why I used to go to the gym. But that's why, I am as buffed and ripped as you see me on the camera, because I go to the gym and I can move these little rocks because the guy who helps all of us at the gym just keeps adding more weights every time I go back, which is, he doesn't understand psychology. It's going to be a disincentive. I am not going to go back to the gym if he keeps giving me more weight. If he gave me less weight, I'd be much happier about going back. So aside from my gym habits, let's go back to the boulder and the rocks. Because the boulder is, I think, for a lot of us as we're sitting here at home, we end up not even realizing that this becomes the picture that we're feeling. And I am a visual person. I love imagery. It works for me. And I always, anytime I'm doing that, I have to picture my boulder and I have to picture my stick of dynamite, reducing it to the rocks I can carry. I will argue this is also true when we look at climate science. This is climate science, but this is what we're all doing. For the green captains, you're not doing the whole pile, but you're doing a couple of those rocks, aren't you? And somebody else is doing these and these, and we start making a difference.
I'll just jump in for a second and say that what's beautiful about those visuals is that that's also a representation of the second principle of the Broadway Green Alliance, which is that the climate crisis didn't happen because of one big bad thing. It didn't happen because of just that boulder falling down and creating climate change. It happened because of all of those little rocks piling up. And so what we can do as climate activists is we're not all just, again, grabbing that big boulder. We are, and we have been before the past 2 weeks, grabbing those little rocks. And so we just, despite the fact that it feels like another big boulder just fell, we can go back to this image and that same imagery. It's just a beautiful representation of the second principle of the BGA that's been there this whole time.
No, that's great. I really do admire that as being the principle for obvious reasons. And I think that also translates, you can take that second principle and still translate it into your own life, which is, can you see it outside in the world in terms of the change that we make and moving, as many of the rocks as we can? And is it also for our personal life? How do we move our own rocks? That will be the title of my next best-selling book, probably. Somebody move the cheese, I'll move the rocks. Here's an inside shrink joke about you do not should on yourself. You get it? Come on, give me a little bit of a groaner with this one. But, the shoulds are really the dangerous things, and that's a true mental health perspective. Shoulds are the ones that get us into trouble. So we tell ourselves things like, I shouldn't get overwhelmed. I shouldn't be fearful. Okay, I'll be Dr. Braverman for a minute and say, well, why wouldn't you get it? Why shouldn't you feel overwhelmed? Everybody's overwhelmed. Why shouldn't you be fearful? We don't know enough about the virus. Or the opposite, we also should on ourselves in another way. I should be positive. I should be brave. Nobody's positive all the time and nobody's brave all of the time, unless they're
I should be green right now. I should be doing a lot of environmental work.
Absolutely. And saying, I should have the bandwidth to do it all. And maybe the bandwidth is enough to get up and just, get showered in the morning. I don't know if anybody watched the Rosie O'Donnell special that she did and interviewed so many wonderful people from the Broadway community. But if anybody else noticed, I started making hashtags for every time somebody said, I haven't showered in a few days. And this was a good thank you for inviting me, because this made me shower and put on a pair of pants that actually had a zipper in them. And that's when we start doing that, these shoulds kind of go away. Like, oh, no, it's not about a should. It's about, I would prefer to be more positive. I'd like to be braver. I really would like to get overwhelmed less often. I really would like to try to reduce my fears. Those you can do, but to tell yourself you should doesn't move those rocks very well. So take a minute. Just think in the last 24 hours, are you shoulding on yourself in any way? I mean, what's your favorite should for yourself?
Andrea?
Sorry?
It's Susan. Just wanted to interrupt for 1 second. I think, are you basically saying we should be changing the shoulds to cans, so that instead of saying I should be positive, I can be positive, or I should take a shower, I can take a shower?
Absolutely. Or even I would like to take a shower more often. That, just changing that language instead of, and thank you for clarifying that absolutism of I should or I shouldn't just doesn't motivate us the way we think it would. If I say to myself I should not be procrastinating, that's not going to get me to stop procrastinating. If I say I would really like to bake a little bit less and maybe work on that article that I've been saying that I would work on for the last, 11 years, I might be able to make movement there. But these shoulds and shouldn'ts are just sort of absolute, and they're kind of punishing, aren't they?
Yeah, does it also stretch to if we see a friend or a colleague who is maybe getting a little bit too wrapped up in the doom and gloom of all of this, I've caught myself, I mean, now that I'm seeing, I have been shooting on him, you know, like, you shouldn't read, maybe you shouldn't read so much news and stuff. Does the you can stop doing that? I don't know, that doesn't.
Or even ask, no, it's a great question, and thank you. Here's what I would do. We have a technique called motivational interviewing. I would take a page from that. Instead of saying, I wonder what it would be like if you watched a little less news. I wonder what it might do for your fears or whatever. Whatever you're seeing that is getting them wound tighter than a top, and say, or would you be willing to join me in pinky swearing that we're only going to if we're using the news, we're going to pinky swear only in the morning, only in the night, no matter how many CNN alerts have come on our phone. So I would sort of take it that way, because we know what we should do. God knows I know what I should do. I'd be a size 4 if I did what I know I should do, but that's not the way it works, right? And just know yourself. What's your favorite should? And for me, sometimes it's just, I know my should is like, I should want to do whatever task it is that I know I don't want to do. And that's, no, I don't. I shouldn't have to want to do that. I know I can do things that are, I want to try to work with myself to do things that I know are good for my career. It's not hard for me to do things for others. That's just a reflexive response on myself, for myself. My shoulds usually are harder when I'm doing for myself. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are others on this webinar that have that same sort of reaction. Other questions? I'm happy to, or clarifications or answers. I always take answers.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Something that I've really been struggling with is the feeling my favorite should is you should be doing more, or you should be doing something. And I'm just wondering, during this time of isolation and solitude, I feel like a lot of us, especially the workaholics and the perfectionists, that we all are struggling with, not doing enough. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to rephrase that should of, I should be more productive. I should be doing more today, that can be more gentle, and knowing that it's okay to not try to fill our days with productivity.
Right. No, it's a absolutely great point, because that's again what we tell ourselves, that I should be, I'm at home. I should have had my entire apartment, clean top to bottom. Everything should be alphabetized and organized, while also saving the planet and coming up with the solution, for the green solution for the world, right? Something along those lines. Nothing ever too big, right? So what it is the way you were doing that yourself. You're already changing the language. I should be more productive, to maybe I would like to be more productive. Let me think of things that maybe I can put down. I've got time now. We're shifting our model from saying we'll be at home for 2 weeks to, hey, this could be 2 months. So it's a little bit for all of you runners out there. It's, if I ask you to run a 100-yard dash, how do you run it? Full out, right? You run as fast as you can. You don't worry about your wind. You're going. If I ask you to run a 10K, you're going to run it very differently. You're going to pace yourself. You're going to think about that. And so when you start with the sort of like, I should, it's like saying, okay, no, I got to reframe this. I thought I was running a sprint. We're running a marathon right now. Not even sure it's a 10K anymore, guys. Sorry about that. I think it's more of a marathon. So how am I going to pace myself? Also, I would like to do more, but some days I'm going to get more flooded with things. Some days I'm going to hear about somebody I know who tested COVID positive, and it's going to be upsetting. And my energy is going into managing the feelings. And maybe the win for that day is that I got it, I kept it together. and I ate and I took care of myself, and that's the most I could do that day. It's taking a much kinder approach to ourselves and reframing the goals. That's going back to the mastery kind of approach. I just work harder and stronger and push myself more, and I can get more done. And I'm pushing back and saying, I don't think so. I don't think that's the way it works. I think it's more about recognizing our both the resources we have available and understanding that that changes from day to day, and then talking more about how do I phrase it so that I can achieve that, I can get more done rather than all of it done. Does that make sense?
And
Okay.
I'll jump in again with, I'm going to lean on that second principle of the BGA, which is that it's a cumulative effort, and a cumulative, approach to solving the climate crisis, right? And that we each have our role to play. Because your question, Laurel, resonates with me entirely. I fill my days struggling with, great, I have all this time, that means we should work harder, faster, smarter. How can we best use this time? And my reframe has been going back to that second principle, which is we each in this time, using all of the great guidance that we've heard, and taking care of ourselves. But we each have a role to play and a rock to add in working toward whatever it is. There's a lot of needs right now, but focusing on this question of being green in the climate crisis is because we didn't get here by that one big bad. We got here from this cumulative building of things that we undo it one by one, and therefore we each have a role to play. And so by doing one action a day, I've played my part, you've played your part, everyone on this call has played their part. And so that's been a helpful reframe for me, is going back to that second principle.
And adding on to that, thank you, Molly, is that I think, well, let me give you an example. 11 o'clock Zoom meeting with the educational core, my colleagues, all three of whom are OBGYNs, so delivering the babies, helping the women, all of that good stuff. And they were all saying, I told myself when I got home, here are all the things that I would get done, all the reading that I wasn't going to get done. I would read all those articles, and all of a sudden I end the day and I think, why didn't I get more done? And these are sort of the false perceptions that we have. I have more time in my day, I should be able to get it all done. I haven't touched one journal article I brought home so far to read. And why? Other things are filling it up, and we don't pay attention to it. And there are things that we have to value too in how they fill up. So just things like connecting with people is not just, I was, hosing off, but it's important to see people because it helps them, it helps me. I have had one of my dear friends who's a lab director I worked with, emailed me this morning, and just, I could tell touching base was so important for her. So I didn't delay doing my work. I was doing work, but it's a different work that's filling my life right now. And that was reaching back to her, writing a long and full email back, and not just, what we might have done on other days is, send each other a quick text. Needs have changed, time demands have changed, including downtime. And that's for all the type A's in us at Laurel. We're all type A, but we have to figure out what that type A means of accomplishing. And I would argue taking care of yourself and others takes time, and it has to go on the list, and it can't be undervalued because you don't see a tangible result. Or the other thing that we often do is because it wasn't hard to do, therefore it's not valuable. So careful of that one too. Let me get through a couple more things because I know we're going to run out of time. As much as it's tempting to stick our head in the sand and hope it will all go away, no, what we got to do is take stock of what this new reality is for ourselves. Certainly, whether we're talking about climate change or even with friends, communication helps to manage reactions and next steps, if we're in it together. And whenever we're all better informed, that ensures best relationships going forward. So even all of us being on this webinar together, I will tell you, will energize all of us and gives us that much more energy reserves, even if it's not in a huge measurable way, to say, okay, I'm going to keep on being greener and keep on fighting the good fight. And remember, unexpected's going to happen during this. This was an email sent to me by my colleague who said, unbeknownst to me, my almost 7-year-old showed this to her Sunday school class on Zoom for show and share. If you look very carefully, these little objects, I work in infertility. There's a sperm, there's an egg in there. So the 7-year-old shares the sperm pen with her Sunday school class. She said, and my colleague said, pretty sure I got this from you. I thought it was a lovely unexpected. I thought perhaps it better informed the Sunday school class. Perhaps the teacher felt differently about it. But just remember, we can't control everything, as my colleague knows. Building resilience and hope in the face of so many mounting crises is not an easy thing to do. We're taking a lesson from our friend. This is a little bit of grit and resilience and certainly hope as he stares at this ball. Eventually, hopefully, he will get down off the chair and just pluck the ball out from between the arms of the chair. Or I hope whoever was the cruel person taking this picture gave the ball to the dog after the picture was snapped. But we have to remember that this is an active choice. And I'm going to lean on the word hope for a minute, because I think hope is the thing sometimes we're forgetting. Hope sometimes can feel foolish in all of this, but hope is an active verb. I need to hope. And so that hope will be, I'm going to hope that when the world gets back to righting itself, we figure out the economy, we figure out Broadway comes back on, because that's one of my best coping tools. You guys are so wonderful that, that's a world away from my world of taking care of everybody else, and you guys take care of me. But I even hope, with the climate, I've got to have hope that the climate is going, that the change is still possible. Because that, if I let go of that hope, then it's very hard to take even another step forward. So what is resilience? Just briefly, this is one of the resilience models out of George Mason University, but I think it's a good one. And it reminds us that resilience has a lot of different categories. Yes, it's physical well-being, so let's never forget that. You got to keep moving during all of this. It's also about our coping tools. And if you don't have a therapist, that's what we do. It's coping tools. And if you have your therapist, hopefully they're all putting you on telehealth for support. There's social support, which we're all already aware of. It's about being positive emotions. Not resilience is being able to also still hold on to the positive in our feelings too. And the one thing that I think also sometimes gets forgotten is what's meaningful in life. If we don't have tests, there's a wonderful study on burnout that looked at what basically makes up for job burnout. And they showed that even if people are doing sort of mindless tasks that they don't find very interesting, if you can give them about 5 to 10% of their work time for tasks that actually are meaningful to them, they don't burn out. So you don't need to have 90% or that 95% we were looking at earlier. So what's meaningful in life? So if making a difference in climate change gives you meaning, that's worthwhile, even if you're not doing anything with it at the moment. So just remember, there are the different components to resilience. So how do you keep resilient? Well, number one, wash your hands. Don't get COVID. Okay? It's much easier to be resilient when you're not sick. We know from the analogy of back in the days when we actually flew on airplanes, that the first thing they would say is, if there's a sudden drop in pressure and the oxygen masks fall from the ceiling, what do? You put your own on first, which anybody who's ever had children knows that is really, really hard to do. You just want to immediately slap that mask on your kid and then I'll put mine on later. It doesn't work. It's just a false premise. You have to have your own oxygen mask on.
Yeah.
And yeah, you have to remember what gives you meaning in your life. You have to have social engagement while still socially distancing. We talked about you have to move your body and exercise. You have to eat right and well and fuel your body. That does not mean that I will stop procrastinating. Cookies are very good in terms of eating well and right, but I also eat my veggies and do all my right things. And you got to remember to add that dash or that spoonful or whatever it is of hopefulness to make things continue right. Um, so think about your options. We always remember Elf, who just liked to smile. That was smiling's my favorite. That's fine. You can do that. But I think there are other options to think about what keeps you going. We take time to take care of ourselves. And I always love my Zen zebra because that's my image when I'm getting a little worked up. A little quickie moment. If you need a moment where you're just feeling like it's all building up, what I always teach everybody is you call BS on yourself. In other words, you take a breath and you put your shoulders down. And if everybody just takes a minute now, even and puts their shoulders down, because we all hunch over the cameras and all that, just putting your shoulders down opens you up, feels good. I'm probably preaching to the choir. You guys probably do this all the time, but don't forget BS and take a breath, because you fill your lungs, you let it out, you are present, you are mindful in your body for that moment. And I have yet, even when I do a lot of consults with people who have health issues and are compromised, it is rare that I will even get that doesn't feel good and takes you for a moment into the present, into the here and now. We're moving out of your head and into your body for a minute. And then finally, I'm going to remind you of a couple of things. Understanding is like eating the proverbial elephant. As Desmond Tutu taught us, there's only one way to eat an elephant, and that's one bite at a time. So who are we to argue with Desmond Tutu? So I invite you, what do you see in the picture now? Are there any other ways to look at this picture? And Molly, if you're seeing anything typed in, let me know.
I was muted. I'm watching the chat.
Thank you. All right. Well, let me start telling you a few things that I see. First of all, I see the sun a lot more than I did before. Look at these rays of sun coming here onto the bus. I see this mask not as one of a fearful mask, but damn, that bus.
Yep.
What?
Face mask is reported. Yep.
Yep. The face mask maybe is not like a scary COVID, but maybe this is really good self-care, and this bus is damn good at it. Maybe this isn't that everybody's gone, but maybe these guys are taking really good care of themselves and a little canine therapy at the same time, and they're walking along. I see that the bus maybe is kissing this truck here, which you can't move, but there's a tiny little weenie car behind it. And you know, if that bus wants to get out, it can just push that a little bit more and get out. And maybe the bus is just resting and getting ready to be there for when all the people start working again and moving around, and that maybe this is not a negative but a positive. So
once Mara sees that food is available and that there's an awning, so maybe that they're feeding people.
absolutely. So all of a sudden we start noticing more things when we open up our vision and understanding whether, where we were standing in terms of our perspective. So there is that. And so I will leave you with the admonition to have a good day. Survive is not a bad thing to wish everybody, but let's be kind to ourselves as well as others. Being kind to others, I think, is easier to do than kind to ourselves. So here's my rule of thumb. You're never allowed to say to yourself something that you would not say to a friend. It's a really self-limiting thing because we are much harder. Your friend said, to pick on what Laurel was saying, I didn't get enough done in the day. You'd be like, oh, come on, look at da 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 da. But to yourself, we don't do that. So you have to be willing to say to yourself only that which you'd be willing to tell a friend or a loved one. So I'm going to end there with good old Lucy now. Instead of saying survive, saying there's counseling help available, but it's nobody's 5 cents anymore. And I know we're out of time. I kind of ran a little over. Sorry, but if people have a few questions or comments, I'm happy to entertain.
Well, thank you. There's lots of thanks coming in the chat. So thank you. I would say we'll say goodbye and everything for now. If you want to stick around, Mom, in the chat, if anyone has individual or questions, we can linger for a few moments. But otherwise, thank you all so much for joining us. It was wonderful to see all of your faces. Oh, now we can see you all at once. And this was a wonderful, thank you for joining us for our very first BGA session. And thank you, Dr. Braverman, also known as Mom.
I like that title better.
Yeah. Great. I will check the messages, or feel free to unmute yourselves if you have a question as we linger. Otherwise, goodbye and thank you, everyone.